welcome to Real Film Snobs. I'm Angela Yeager. We have the second part of our special episode, Best Films of 2020, and I'm here again with friend and fellow film snob and filmmaker, Nathaniel Dunaway. Welcome to the show again, Nathaniel.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, no problem. So this is it. This is our big one, the top three films of best films of 2020. And this is our top three. As I mentioned on the last episode, we decided to do six instead of 10 or five because, why not? 2020 was a weird year, so we're going to do a weird top six list. So I'll jump right in with my number three favorite film of 2020, which was Crip Camp. This is a documentary that showed on Netflix, and this is about the disability rights movement. I was really excited yet apprehensive coming into this because this is the field that I work in. I work in disability services for the state. And so I was really curious to see how this was depicted because this is not a topic that gets really any attention in film. And wow, was I surprised and really pleased. This is a film that shows really the birth of the disability rights movement among a group of campers in upstate New York in the 70s and how they came together and discovered that this really inclusive environment that this camp has teaches them how to be advocates for themselves and to go out into the community and then advocate for better rights for disabilities. These same group of people end up being some of the folks that ended up bringing about the landmark legislation, the Americans with Disabilities Act, the ADA, into the 90s, that really said, hey, people with disabilities need to have access to things like buildings and shouldn't be able to be fired because of their disability. And, all these really important, legislative acts that are really recent. People forget that, up until, well, really now, even today, some people with disabilities are still institutionalized in some states, luckily not in Oregon. But, the ADA is really new in a way, it's 90s legislation. And so a lot of these folks are still around to talk about their experiences and what they did to advocate for themselves. And I found it to be really powerful. Did you get a chance to check this one out?
Did not get a chance to watch this one, unfortunately. It sounds really good.
It's amazing. And it's another one that's nominated for Best Documentary. It is my favorite to win for the Oscars. By the time this airs, we'll know whether, it did or not. That's such a strong category this year with films like My Octopus Teacher, which you talked about in the last episode, Collective, Romanian documentary that's in my runner-up list, which I also gave 4 stars to. So, I mean, there's a lot of really powerful documentaries this year nominated. So, but to me, Crip Camp was my favorite of all of them. I loved how it told the personal stories of the people. So it's not just about activism from, one woman, wanting people to recognize her as a sexual being and her getting into the face of people that just sort of assumed she went in to get tested back in the day for gonorrhea, and they just assumed that it was something else because it didn't even strike them that someone with cerebral palsy could be sexually active. And so she's very frank about that discussion. And and then there's a really interesting section where they had to sit in San Francisco to protest disability, the lack of disability rights in San Francisco. And the Black Panthers end up helping them out. And other different activism groups end up coming and joining the sit in. So there's really, especially from an activist perspective, it's a really powerful story to tell and shows how the work's still ongoing today.
Wow, great.
Yeah. So you're number three.
My number three of 2020 is First Cow,
Huh.
directed by Kelly Reichardt, starring John Magaro and Orion Lee. Um, yeah, Kelly Reichardt is an acquired taste for some people. She makes very slow movies, very, just some people would say tedious, but
I
I
wouldn't.
good. Um, I yeah, I just really liked this movie. I'm already drawn to her movies because most of them are set in Oregon. And I really liked Meek's Cutoff.
Love that
And
film.
yeah, and so I was excited to see this. I knew very little about it other than it was set in Oregon, and was like being put on some lists of like tangential like westerns. Like
Mm.
it doesn't have any like western tropes. It's just really the time period and the kind of characters. It's much more of a northwestern because the characters are trappers and things like that. But essentially, it is about a cook for trappers, for fur trappers in the Oregon Territory in probably like the 1830s or 40s. And he's very much not the tough mountain man type. One of the first sort of indications you get of that is there's this salamander on the ground that's like on its back, like upside down, and he like turns it over and it just crawls away, and you kind of get this idea of him being like this more sensitive character, right? And doesn't fit in with these trappers who he's traveling with and cooking for. And they immediately abandon him as soon as they get to this fort and get paid. So then he's kind of wandering, and meets up with a Chinese immigrant who is on the run. And from there, it kind of becomes this, roommate buddy movie,
It's a
basically.
buddy movie, yeah.
Movie, yeah, where the two of them start living together in this like little shack, and it's just they have philosophical conversations. They have conversations about what they want to do. Cookie wants to open up a hotel or a bakery, and then they talk about a hotel bakery, and they want to go down to San Francisco and do this. They just need the money for it. So then basically where the plot kind of kicks in is the first cow, the first like milking dairy cow is introduced to the Oregon Territory. And I ended up reading a lot about this because I was so interested in the concept
Oh,
of
really?
like I never thought about the idea of like introducing livestock, I mean, to an area like cows were not in that area whatsoever. The working title of the movie was actually Slow Elk, because that's
Mm,
what the first peoples of Oregon called cows when they were first introduced to the territory, was slow
I like
elk.
that title.
Yeah, right. So anyway, yeah, they from there it kind of becomes a movie about two guys stealing milk from a cow that they don't own so that they can make these like biscuits and like pancakes and things, and
Buttermilk biscuits, no
milk,
less. Buttermilk biscuits. Yeah.
actually, and sell them, for to all these people at this fort. And yeah, I just thought it was a very just interesting, like quiet movie about friendship. I thought it was great just to have a character like King Lu, the
Hmm.
Chinese character. And I thought that performance was great, a very underrated performance from 2020. Um, and yeah, so that's First Cow. What do you think
Yeah,
of this?
and I love this movie as well. It didn't make my top six. It probably should have. The problem is I am a big Kelly Reichardt fan. We own, I think, most of her movies here at home. Both of us, my husband and I are both fans. And for me, it fell below Meek's Cutoff, which made my top 10 of that year, and Wendy and Lucy, which I think are her two masterpieces. Certain Women as well, which also I gave 4 stars to. It fell just below that, but above some of her other films. And
Yeah.
so I'm sort of in the middle. But what I loved about this movie, but besides the fact that only Kelly Reichardt would go, I'm going to make a movie about two male friendship and a cow, and that's going to be the movie. And the big crux is, oh, they're stealing some of the milk to make biscuits, and you're like, you can imagine the average moviegoer who was real excited about Wonder Woman is like, and what happens then to like orbs come out and lasers come out of their eyes, or like what's that? Nope, that's the whole movie.
That's
And there's a lot of scenes of foraging, which that's what I love about her movie. She brings this element of authenticity where but it never goes into like social realism. There's something still very like poetic and unreal about her films and fantastical while still very real, which is I don't know how she does it, because Meeks Cutoff had the same feeling. He felt like, oh, this is what it would have really been like in Eastern Oregon back in the day. I was on the Pioneer Trail, but yet you wouldn't say it seems like a documentary or even like social, fiction in that way. And this one's the same way. There's a lot of scenes of them just like trying to find something to eat in the forest. And even though that sounds boring, that's what you would have been doing if you were in the Oregon Territory in the 1800s. And they didn't have farms, they didn't have grocery stores, and he's out in the woods just trying to find things that he can eat so he doesn't starve. The other thing I really liked about it is that it is sort of it. I agree with you. It's not really a western, but it's very much like Kelly Reichardt to take a kind of character that you would never see in a western and put that character in a western setting. So in this case, we have the Chinese immigrant character, right? Not someone you would ever see centered as the star of a movie like this. And then this man who is the white man, but he is the type of person that you're like, how is he even going to make survive in this type of,
Right.
this is like if you took an arty, sensitive, poetic type of, like a, semi hipster almost like who, and then you said, here, you're in the Oregon Territory and you have to work with these super macho trappers. And see what happens. And he's very uncomfortable around these guys. He's not a super macho person. And you think, well, there must have been guys like that. But whenever you watch movies about like the 1800s, all the men are like hyper masculine, right? It's all like The Revenant or something, people struggling with bears. And it's like, no, there were probably guys like this too,
Mhm.
but they don't ever make movies about them. So I love that about her movies, and the photography is gorgeous.
Beautiful movie.
So
There
yeah,
were a few times where, just as a filmmaker myself, who has shot movies in very similar settings in Oregon in the woods, there were a few times where I was like, I don't know why. I don't know if I agree with the aspect ratio decision on this, just because she is filming such great landscapes, and it's,
right. She's using the square.
yeah, crammed into this square, but the visuals themselves are really really impressive. And it's a movie that takes its time with a lot of things, but you're right, it captures that feeling of probably living in that time where there's your priorities are very much just like, where am I sleeping, what am I making
What am I
for,
eating?
how am I going to make a little bit of money today, you know what I mean? It's very day by day, and it probably was, you know slow like that,
Yeah. Yeah,
and
and dirty too. Like when they go into the town, the
very
fort,
dirty.
it's muddy, which it's
Yeah,
like, yeah, it's Oregon. It was raining. It's muddy. That's what it was. There was no roads. So,
yeah,
yeah, no, I just love her take on authenticity. And I do think that the aspect ratio is an interesting point. I wonder if she did that on purpose to make it anti-Western, because we think of like sweeping vistas with films about the West.
yeah,
And so
you think
she's
about.
bringing in that scope to really like focus you.
Yeah, that could be, because it is a movie about character. It's not, the setting is secondary. What it really is about is, like you said, male friendship, two characters who, in this specific setting, don't have friends.
Right.
What I mean? They're both
They're
outside.
outsiders.
Yeah,
Yeah. And I love that. I love that where that their friendship is about the fact that they don't fit with anybody else, so they fit with each other. So it was rather beautiful in that way.
yeah.
So we'll move on to my number two movie, which is Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, directed by George C. Wolfe. And this is another Oscar nominee based on the play by August Wilson, starring Viola Davis in a much deserved Academy Award nominated performance, as well as the late, great Chadwick Boseman. Viola Davis plays Ma Rainey, the blues singer of the 20s, and the film takes place over a recording session on a hot day in Chicago. Ma Rainey is putting up with some producers who are encouraging her to get done as quickly as possible so they can get her recordings out there because they are making money off of her. She's eager to get back to the South where she feels more comfortable. And she clashes with Chadwick Boseman's, modern horn player who has some ideas of his own and would like to go out and be more independent as a musician. So, as a movie based on a play, which is something that I don't always love because sometimes I think it can be very hard to translate. What I loved about this movie is that even though you can tell it was based on a play, it doesn't really hide that in a lot of ways. The performances to me make this movie come alive. It felt raw. There are some scenes. Viola Davis is not on the screen every moment of the movie, despite being the lead actor. But her performance is so amazing that she really makes the most of every scene she's in. And as a fan of Mon Rainey's music, we have some of her music here at our house. I was really pleased to just finally actually get some recognition for her as well as a great blues singer of that era. So I'm curious, did you get to see this movie?
Well, I'm glad that you went through the whole intro for it, because that is also my number two
Oh
of.
wow! Oh wow! Okay, just by total coincidence. Wow.
Yeah, yeah. So we can just get right into discussing this one. Yeah, I loved this movie. You actually recommended it to me the last time I was on Real Film Snobs, and yeah, I'm already a big fan of August Wilson. I love his plays. I love the Pittsburgh Cycle, um, and I just thought this was such an amazing translation to film that really really works well, because um, it's about the characters. The settings. They give you two settings exactly, and it's just back and forth between them. But it's not ever stagnant like some play adaptations.
Right.
I do think Fences, for example, was one where I think more could have been done with the camera to separate it from being a play script, because it's just the script for the play but shot as a movie. But there were times where it did feel a little bit too stagnant. But I never felt that with Ma Rainey. I
Mm-mm.
felt the camera was always energetic. It was always it was always exactly where it needed to be. um, and yeah, I just really enjoyed this movie, and it's an incredible performance from Chadwick Boseman.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up because I remember recommending it to you because you're a fan of August Wilson's work and you've seen Fences, and I was curious how it translated for you. I actually liked Fences, but I didn't love it for the reasons you bring up. I thought that, it had that stagnation feeling. This film, despite basically having two main set pieces, the studio and then kind of that basement area where the band's hanging out, there's a little bit of exterior shots, but it's very minimal. Um, I think the camera movement and the actor's energy, the way that he films Bozeman in particular, and he's a very high energy person. He's constantly moving around, constantly playing his horn, which is very much like a musician. Even when he's not playing, he's playing, right? So he's just that they really capture that energy, and I thought the performances were amazing. I also love that it showed these different perspectives about for the Black experience about the South versus the North. Ma Rainey really hates being up in Chicago. She just can't wait to get out because she's not respected there, and she knows that these white producers are just using her.
Mhm.
He is going for wants to go in a more modern direction with his music, and he really doesn't want to go back to the South because he's a young Black man who wants to make something of himself. And so I really loved the juxtaposition there between their characters, and that there's different perspectives that we're seeing there.
Yeah, yeah, and I love just characters when you have that juxtaposition between a character who already has a really high status and a character who is full of ambition. um, there's always going to be that kind of like clash there,
Hmm.
and then just the power dynamic aspect of it, where Ma Rainey has all the power, both in regards to her band and then also the white producers who, are just like constantly sweating and panicking and trying to get these
Yeah,
recordings done. But Ma Rainey wants, it's hot. It's like this horrifically hot day, and it's just like everything's got to be just so for her to perform. um so they kind of set up this like kind of diva idea to her, but then she like performs, and it's like you get that she's like worth it, that she's like knows her worth, and that
right.
not really going to put up with these people who, like you said, are just taking advantage of her for her voice. She's going to use that power that she has.
Right, and she knows that these guys don't care about her and that they're probably not paying her all that well anyway. And so she recognizes her place, and she's like, as a Black woman in this time period of the 20s, and she's gonna not put up with any foolishness. And I loved the way Viola Davis captured that, and not to mention that she's also a bisexual or lesbian
Right.
um, person. And so there's another element to that, that she's just exactly who she is and she has confidence in who she is. And so I just loved the performances in this movie. It's a tough one because I really want, in some ways, Viola Davis to win for Best Actress, but I don't think she probably will. And Chadwick Boseman, like you said, is just tremendous. So I'm glad we both agreed, and it was both of our number twos. So we can move on to our number ones. Drum roll, please. My number one film of 2020 is Nomadland by the director Chloe Zhao. This has been talked about a lot. A ton of critics have had it on their list, and I didn't want to be one of those. But when I saw it, it blew me away. So I'm going with the majority on this one. For me, though, what was really exciting to see is I've seen all of Chloe Zhao's previous films. So Songs My Brother Taught Me, which was her debut film, which is amazing as well. And then her follow up to that, The Writer, which I saw at Salem Cinema, and I believe twice, and loved. And so to me, it was also exciting to just see a filmmaker fully getting the appreciation she actually deserved, because her other two films are just as fantastic. This tells the story of a woman played by Frances McDormand who has lost her husband, and then finally the town that she lives in, which is a factory town, is completely closing. The town is literally disappearing off the map. So she goes on the road, becomes a modern day nomad living out of her van. And I think what the film does so well is show that there's this huge slice of Americans who are transient for different reasons. Not all of these people are down and out or poverty stricken. Some of them choose to live this way. They want this lifestyle. They have different things in their past, maybe some pain that's caused them. For whatever reason, they don't want to be rooted to a specific place. Other people are doing it for that reason. They don't have a lot of funds, and they have this one vehicle that can take them places, and they can be there. And so what Chloe Zhao does somewhat so well, and what was in her other films, is again back to my review of the previous episode of Minari. She's very interested in not just, I would say, rural people, but really people who are outsiders and who live on the outskirts. Her previous two films were about Native people, the Lakota Indians, and the Pine Ridge Reservation of South Dakota, and we're centered on the native people and their experiences and their connections to the land. And she's really, really interested in telling stories about people and their connection to the land in a different way. It's very different than the Kelly Reichardt perspective. It is more romanticized. She gets a lot of comparisons to Terrence Malick, which I don't think is a bad thing. I mean, people are like, oh, it's like Terrence Malick, and that's bad since when? So, I mean, it's photography wise. Unlike Terrence Malick, she actually cares about the people at the center of the screen, not just the birds flying by them. And so she actually can develop character while having these amazing vistas. So it is my number one film of the year. It was a strong year for movies, however. So did you get to see this one?
I've not seen this one yet. This was one that I definitely want to see. I was trying to prioritize watching it at my work at Salem Cinema, so hopefully that can still happen.
I think you can still see it there, right? So you should be able to check it out.
We have the Yeah, we have actually all of the Best Picture nominees right now. It's just a matter of will I be working it or not. So I'm gonna really try to see this one before the Oscars. Um, yeah, it's one that while at work I've been able to go up into the projection booth and watch some sections from, just because I really like Chloe Zhao's use of non-actors is really really impressive to me, that she's able to get, and it's not just like a sort of documentary thing where it's like I'm just going to
Mm-hmm.
point the camera at regular people, and you know it really is, she's using non-actors in you know
A
a
fictional setting.
yeah, and I think that's always really impressive when directors are able to pull that off.
And do it really well. I mean, I would say, it was funny when I saw this with my husband. He's like, I actually wanted them to follow some of the other people. He found the Frances McDormand character in some ways less interesting than some of the people she meets on the road. And those are all real people. All those people were real nomads for the most part, with the exception of David Strawsharn, who plays the man she meets on the road. But most of them are non-professional actors. And she did that in The Rider and Song My Brother Taught Me. She used all non-professional actors, I think, to great effect. She's one of the few modern directors I think that does that really well. There's people like Alexander Payne that do that, but I don't always think they fully pull it off, in my opinion. He's used it sometimes, you could kind of tell. I think she's able to get to people authentically who they are and tell their story in a way that's not a documentary. It fits still within the story of this movie. But you got the sense they were kind of telling aspects of themselves to Frances McDormand when she meets them. So yeah, I love this movie. I hope you do get to see it. And when you do, you'll have to text me and let me know what you thought. So you're number one. I'm
My number
excited.
one, yeah, this is one that, I mean, I don't pretend to be a film critic. I love movies and I love watching movies, and I love them for different reasons. And so I didn't specifically, set out for this to like watch necessarily all of like the Oscar nominated movies or anything. So my number one is just really the movie that hit me personally the most, and that I can say is my favorite of 2020, which is The Vast of Night. Did you see this movie?
I've never heard of this movie, Nathaniel.
All right.
Wow.
So yeah, the Vast of Night. It is directed by Andrew Patterson, and it is a pretty low budget science fiction film set in the late 50s in the American Southwest, and it's very much just a love letter to 50s and 60s sci-fi, Twilight Zone and Invasion
Mm.
of the Body snatchers and all those sorts of things, while also managing to be a very modernized version of those kinds of stories. I say low budget, but the visuals that this movie is able to pull off with that budget are really really impressive, and it does things I have not seen in another movie before. Some of these tracking shots, going into a high school like gym during a basketball game, and it's really visually impressive. The camera sweeps across this small town, like literally going through backyards and down streets, because it's a very very small town. um Essentially the story of it is that there's a radio DJ and a telephone switchboard operator, and they're both like teenagers or like 20 somethings, and they both hear this strange like radio frequency that interrupts the radio broadcast and interrupts the telephone lines.
Hmm.
And they think they start to believe that this is something that is of extraterrestrial origin. And they basically put out a call on the radio, like for people who heard that, or like people that might know something about this radio frequency. And then the movie is so much of it is just these two characters talking to each other, or just the voices of people calling in on the radio. Uh,
Wow. How did you hear about this movie, Nathaniel?
um, that is a great question, because it dropped on Amazon Prime last summer,
Okay.
and um, honestly, I think it was just recommended to me. It was just such a random kind of like on Prime. You know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
just like you might like this based on watching the Twilight Zone and stuff. So I just kind
Is
of
the director anyone
put it.
whose work you've seen before?
It's their
Or?
first. It's their first film. So there's so much about it that just as an independent filmmaker, I was so impressed with,
Yeah.
and the fact that it is so visually impressive,
Mm-hmm.
but it also has a script that matches that. It has dialogue that is really, really powerful, really just this great back and forth, great energetic dialogue. But then also you get things like I mentioned that it kind of it adds some new things to
Mm-hmm.
uh, the science fiction genre. I think it talks about race a bit more in the science fiction genre than like
That's exciting.
definitely movies did in the 50s and 60s. So
Right.
this
Yeah,
is
I'm super excited to check that one out along with Bad Education. Two of the ones of yours I hadn't seen before. So,
yeah, definitely.
Vast of Night.
Vast of Night. Yeah, just a really just kind of small, definitely flew under the radar, but a really really impressive sci-fi movie.
Well, there you have it, everyone. That's our top three films of 2020. As always, thank you to Nathaniel Dunaway for co-hosting with me. You can check us out at realfilmsnobs.com, CC Media, Scan TV, Corvallis Access Media, KMUZ, and KMWV. As always, thank you to our fantastic sponsors, crew, Brad. Thank you for watching. Have a great day and great movies.